Hello everyone, this is LSM, and today I'm going to make a tutorial about how to make a text-based RPG. So, for starters, just to give you guys some information on what this tutorial is about, this tutorial is targeted at people who already have a basic to intermediate understanding of PHP, who can make simple applications like, for instance, what I previously showed in my online store tutorial. You should already be familiar with that, or else you will probably struggle with this. With that said, if you're new to PHP but you understand at least the basics such as variables, arrays, um, form input, and display, you may be able to work through this tutorial. It may take you maybe a little bit longer than some other people, but you should be able to work through it. But I would recommend this more for people who have a basic understanding of how to make simple PHP pages, but are having a hard time making the jump to making more of a large-scale application. To look at what more of a large-scale application looks like, I'll go take a quick overview of my own game, World of Bleach RPG. So, what I got here? For a text-based RPG, which is what we're looking at, you're going to need a landing page like this. You need the ability to create an account. So someone needs to be able to register. You need to have people able to log in. You need inbox. You need chat. Most importantly, you need fighting. So, example of fighting here. Someone goes into a battle. You need to have selectable maybe moves that they can select and attack with. This is just turn-based combat until the battle ends. And then you're probably going to want to have some place for them to purchase abilities or techniques, as well as a place for them to restore their health when their health gets low. I have a lot of health here, but you can still heal it up like that. And then probably some place to equip the various techniques into slots. You don't have to have this. You can make people able to use every technique they own, but usually you'll have an equip in the game. There's also many more advanced features you can put in, but the basics are basically the having an account, logging in, logging out, having battle, having maybe they earn money from battles, which they can use to purchase health or purchase weapons to fight better. That's sort of the basics. So I have my dev server set up here. This is actually my local host. I am running a PHP's built-in web server, which I may do a separate video on things like how to install PHP, how to set it up, how to develop on it, and then additionally how to set up a remote server, like maybe that you would get from a shared web host. And but this is basically just a PHP web server. You can look up instructions for how to install PHP on your own computer and how to start its built-in web server. But I made a batch file to do it on my computer. So this is already running, which you can see here. This is my development environment. So you see I have localhost. I've already created the directory Warriors of Magic. And I have a file in here which you'll notice says Hello World. This is the file. It just says Hello World. I'm going to change this to say Hello Tutorial. Save it, we'll reload it here, and you'll see there we go. Okay, so the first thing that you need to do in deciding and making a text-based RPG is actually, hold on, let me turn this off. The first thing you need to do is make a plan, because any coding project is not going to get very far without a plan. The first thing you need to do, there's 5 steps of programming. If you watched my other tutorials, you'll probably have some concept of this. But the first step you need to do is define what your program needs to do. So we need to decide what we want our text-based RPG to do. Before we do that, we probably need to come up with a concept for it. As you'll notice by the name Warriors of Magic, I kind of came up with, this is just a very standard game. So, come up with a concept. Concept for this game is Warriors of Magic. This is going to be a straightforward fantasy RPG where users use swords or magic. Okay, second thing, figure out what features you want. So from using swords or magic, there's a couple things. We know you have to have a character. Like any good RPG, you need a character. The character has to have stats, right? So we'll probably have level ups. So we'll say you'll gain XP from fighting, and you'll level up X amount of EXP. Let's say every level you gain 10 health, and 1 stat point. We need to decide what the stats are. Stats. Put these mostly here. So let's see. We're gonna have swords or magic. So probably we're gonna have strength increases damage with swords. Intelligence increases damage with magic. And then we could also put endurance increases defense. We could make another stat to increase defense against magic, but we can just do it combined. It's fine. This game is going to be pretty simple anyway. Okay. The next thing we need to figure out, so our battle system. We're going to have turn-based combat, which means each player takes turns against AI opponents. We'll call them monsters, utilizing weapons or abilities. Okay, there should be multiple AI to fight. So you'll have a character with stats, health, XP. Probably need to make a do energy for magic as well. Nah, I think we could skip that for this one. We'll just have health as your resource. We'll need money gains from combat, which the users will use. Healing shop to restore health with money. And an weapon shop, say weapon shop, to purchase weapons or spell books. We'll just say spells. We'll make it easy. We'll say spells. Okay. Let's think about this. So we'll have characters. You can log on. You can fight different monsters. Your stats will come into play in combat. You'll use either weapons or you'll use magic. You'll get money from fighting them, which you can use to restore your health, or you can go to the weapon shop and buy more weapons and spells. Obviously, for a full-fledged game, you'd add a lot more than this, but these are sort of the basics. And once you can do this, you can fairly easily make everything else within the game. So I want to focus on this and on getting the structure for this setup, so that you have a sort of game ecosystem where players fight to get money, to get weapons, to fight. So you kind of get it in a circle. That's when you get some gameplay going. So once you've got this, you got the concept, you figured out what features you want. So you've pretty much got step one of what you need your thing to do. You need to figure out how to do it. But in reality, what you really want to do right now is you want to make a data structure, because this can be a little bit hard. But I'll move this to the side here. Make a new note. Okay, so what you want to do when you're making a data structure is you want to figure out what all different objects are you going to have in the game. So the first object you're going to have is a character or a user. Since we're not going to have multiple characters per user, we can just call this user. So one object we're going to have is going to be user. And you want to figure out what stats are tied to this. You're going to need a user ID. They're going to need, as you can see here, they're going to need level, EXP, we'll say health. The other thing when you're making a game, you can't just have this health. You need to have a max health so that you have some idea of where the health needs to stop at. Stats, we're going to have strength, intelligence, endurance. Okay, I think that's mostly everything. Oh, we're going to need an inventory as well. We'll add weapons here and spells. So this is all the different data items that you're going to need to store for your user. And then if you look at everything else, we'll have the battle. We're going to need AI opponents. So we'll call them monsters. Monsters are going to need ID. They'll need health. Actually, they'll just need max health. We'll store their health in this session. They'll also need strength, intelligence, endurance, and we'll just say, we'll say weapons and spells. Okay. The other thing we could put here for monsters, which you might not think about, we want to have money gains from combat. So probably what we're going to want to do is we're going to have higher money gains, the higher level the monsters. So we'll put a level on monsters. The level on monsters is basically going to determine, we'll have this as an indicator of how hard the monster is going to be. And the money gain of the monster will also be determined from their level. So we might make the base money gain 10, and then let's say for every level the monster is, we'll add 5 to the money gain. Healing shop, we don't need to store this as a database table. We can just make this as a page. Same thing with the weapon shop, but we are going to need something for weapons and the spells. Now this is one thing you might think about. Do you need separate weapons and spells? You could put these into one category known as attacks. It depends on how many differences you want to have between these. Since there's probably not going to be too many differences between these for now, I guess what we'll probably do is we can actually put them into a single attacks. So we'll call this attacks, and we'll call this attacks. What we'll do to separate weapons and spells is we will set a type variable in each attack that will say the type is either melee or magic. And that will let us determine whether it should do more damage from strength or more damage from intelligence. Okay, so every attack is going to need an ID. It's also going to need a strength. We could call this damage. Or we could call it power. Let's call it power. What is it going to need? It's going to need a purchase cost to buy it in the shop. And it's going to need a type. I'll put type above it a little bit, actually. So type, this is going to be melee or magic. Power, purchase cost, and I think that's good. So this is basically all of the core data that we need to make our game. So what we're going to go ahead and start with is we're going to go ahead and put this in the database. I don't think I actually have a MySQL database set up. Alright, so I set up a MySQL server really quickly. I just paused the video while I did that. What I've got here, I'm going to use PHP MyAdmin to show you the administration tools because PHP MyAdmin is free. You can download it. I'll do a separate video sometime about how to set up PHP MyAdmin along with other things. But basically, once you have PHP MyAdmin, it's fairly straightforward. I'll actually even show you the creating tables through this. So to open our data structure back up real quick, when we want to create the database, the only table I'm going to worry about for right now is the user table because we want to make the login. So we'll put this table in first. You can actually go ahead and copy all this. Today I'm going to do user. Alright, so user, well, we could just do users. Number of columns, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9. Okay, go. And then those columns are going to be, just move this down, ID, level, EXP, health, max health, should be strength, endurance, or strength, intelligence, endurance, and attacks. Strength, endurance, intelligence, and attacks. So those are all the names. Now we need to think about the data types. So this is ID is going to be an integer. Level is going to be the same. You could do level as a small int if you wanted to save space. If you hover over this, you see that the range is up to 32,767. I don't think we're going to have 33,000 levels in our game, so it's probably safe to do it as a small int. You might wonder why you want to do that. It's not really necessary, but if you're doing this on a live server, it's more efficient. EXP is also going to be an integer. Health, we're actually going to use a float for this. Same thing with max health. We'll do a float. Now here on the values, I'm actually going to go ahead and say 12, 2. which just means we're going to have 12 digits. 2 of these are going to be floating point. Strength, intelligence, and intelligence. These can all be integers. These are going to be stat points. You get 1 per level up. Attacks. This is going to need to be a varchar. We could even just set it to a text because that's a variable length up to a pretty long length. 65,000 characters. And that's fine. Default values. This actually, we're going to set this. ID is going to be in this column called AI. That means auto increment. So this is usually what you want to do for all of your ID columns. They're going to be an integer, and they're going to be your primary key, and they're going to be auto increment. What that means is every time you insert a new row into the database will automatically assign the next available number. So if you have 17 users, you insert another one, it will assign ID number 18 to it. The rest of these you can all pretty much leave blank. You don't need defaults for most of these. You could set the defaults here, but that means if you decided to change the defaults, you'd have to change your database structure. And if you move to another server and everything, it just makes everything more complicated. So it's kind of easier to define the defaults inside the PHP scripts. Other than that, I think that's all good. We will go ahead and save. And here's our table. So now that we have our table, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to figure out how to access it inside the PHP script. We're going to make a login system. First, to be able to make a login system, when you're making smaller applications, you usually just run standard. You just put regular database queries in. But since we're trying to learn how to make more of a larger application here, when you're making a larger application, you want a centralized way to handle your database queries. So you want to make like essentially a function that you can do to say run a database query. The reason you want to do this is because a great example, right now you may be used to using the function MySQL query. MySQL query. You might be used to using this function to run a query. So you'll have some kind of query. You'll run it through this function. The problem is this function right now is actually deprecated. It's going to be removed in a future version of PHP. So what happens if your entire application is filled with MySQL query function calls, and suddenly one day you wake up and none of them work? Now granted, you get to choose what version of PHP you have, but still, you don't want to have to go through your application and change, 400 database queries or something. Maybe it's only like 50. You don't want to change all those database queries. So instead what we're going to do is we're going to make a class that actually manages the database connection for us and can centralize which database function to call, MySQL query or MySQL query, or maybe we could even call like SQLite if you decide to change databases altogether. We're going to do that. And it's also going to centralize error handling so that you don't have to write, you might be familiar with the whole MySQL query. You'll do like con query or die MySQL error, right? Well, what you can do is you can replace this. When you make a standard system object, you can just do database query, and it will handle everything for you. We're going to store this inside the database object, and then this database query function is going to automatically throw this. I'll show you how in a sec. So we'll make a new file. This is going to be database.php. Database object to handle managing database connection and queries. Alright, so in the database object, we're going to need a couple things. We're going to need a variable for the connection, and then we'll go into a couple of other things later. For right now, let's see, we'll do the construct Now when you're connecting to a database, you need 4 variables. You need the host, you need the database username, the database password, and then the actual database name. So we're going to go ahead and have these all in our connect function. Actually, we can do them in the construct and just make this automatically connect. Here we go. So we're going to do host, username, password, database. Okay. And then we're going to do MySQL query. Oh no, we'll do connect. Connect, host, username, password, database. You might notice here, string, DB name. All these tilted prompts are part of the auto-completion or code intelligence feature in Notepad++. Many code editors have this. Also, int port. I'm running my MySQL server on 3306 on my machine. Most of the time you can leave it default. I'm just including that for whatever reason. And then we're going to actually do MySQL connect. That is what it returns, right? Yeah. Okay. Alright. Now we're actually going to do this con. And then if this doesn't work for whatever reason, we're going to throw a new exception. Error connecting to database. Okay, let's start with this and see if we can make it connect to the database. We'll go ahead and save this as database object.php. Now we're going to do here, we'll go ahead and take this out. We'll require database object.php. And then we'll go ahead and require another file that we're going to have to make here in a second. Now you notice the reason for this being capitalized and this not. This is because it's a class. So for the class, I'm trying to make the file match the class name, which class names have the first letter capital. Normal variables don't. So that's why there's a difference there. In the database vars, this is just going to be a pretty simple file with host equals localhost, username equals. You have to set this up on your own server. But for this one, it's War of Magic user, and the password is AEF1886. And the database name is War of Magic. It's all correct, right? Yep, War of Magic. All right. So go ahead and save this. Database vars.php. We'll go ahead and say database equals new database object host username password database. Actually, return values don't matter in a construct function. Yeah, it automatically returns this. But so we will throw this exception. Okay, now I'll go ahead and save this, and I'll just test it to see if it's working here. It's not saying anything, which is a pretty good sign. It means this isn't throwing an exception, because if this was throwing an exception, it should fail there. Okay, that's all good. So we'll go ahead and make a quick register page here. Well, let's test something from the database first. Let's just insert a dummy row here. Say level 4. Oh, I completely forgot something. One other slight thing we'll need in the data structure here is username and password for the user. If you need to add things, you can go to structure, add 2 columns after ID. It's going to be username. This is going to be a varchar of about 50 characters. And then password will be about the same, 50 characters. Okay, there we go. Let's actually go ahead and make the register page. Go ahead and copy over this database connection. This is going to be a fairly straightforward form application. We're going to display a form. So I'll go ahead and make that here. And then we're going to have a username. Password. And a submit button. We'll go ahead and call this register, just to provide a hook. Indent that nicely. And here we're going to say if not empty, post register. So this is going to trigger off the submit button being clicked. If the submit button is being clicked, post register will be set, and it will not be empty. Okay, so if it's not empty, we're going to go ahead and process the information here. Username equals, now here's a fun part. It's typical that when you get some information out of the post, you could just do this. Password equals post password. So this will fetch whatever the user entered for their username and password. But if you're familiar with databases, you know that you need to sanitize this data first. Typically, the way you would do that would be by running it through MySQL real escape string. But since we have this database object, what if maybe we want to do some other operations on it? We can streamline the process just in case there's any other kind of sanitization operations we need to do, and make a single function here called clean raw data. And then we can take the raw data. In this way we can handle it if we're running with 2 different databases at the same time or something. Provides more ability to modify it later. We'll just return MySQL real escape string. Also, I believe this needs a connection now. Yeah, so we'll do this con raw data. Okay, so what this does, we're using the connection that we established here. Okay, so now we have our clean function set up here, so we can use it on our registration. Do database clean. Okay, there we go. Now we also need to run some validation on this, make sure it's long enough, stuff like that. So we'll use a try catch block. If username, we'll do string lengths. So let's say 5. Let's make the password have to be at least 6. Password must be at least 6 characters. We'll go ahead and add a max length for the username. We don't need a max length for the password because the script will automatically impose one. There's a maximum post input size, and basically you want to let people be able to make long passwords. It's honestly fine. Okay, so now we check for the minimum and maximum length of the username. We check for the minimum length of the password. I want to go ahead and add one more thing onto the username here. Just going to be checking to make sure that it's alphanumeric. There's a function in PHP for this. I believe it's C-type alname. We'll go ahead and look it up here. Yes. Okay, checks if all the characters in the provided string text are alphanumeric. This is pretty straightforward. I'll make sure it returns returns boolean. Okay. If not C-type alnum username exception, username must be only letters or numbers. Now in reality, you are usually going to want to use a complicated regular expression for this, which you can do with the function I believe pregmatch is one of the common functions, but I don't really want to get into regular expressions in this tutorial. They're a whole topic all to themselves. But normally what you do is you would create a pattern that would check to make sure the username is maybe only letters, numbers, dashes, underscores, and spaces are usually things you would allow. Maybe like a single space, but not multiple in a row. So you can create a regular expression to do that, but that's pretty complicated, and it's not really necessary in this tutorial, so I'm just going to use this instead. Okay, so there's our username validation, minimum length, maximum length. Check to make sure there's no special characters in it. Password is there. Then if everything is good, if you're not familiar with the try-catch block, if any of these checks fail, and you see where it says throw new exception, well, when it gets thrown here, none of the rest of this code will execute. It will get caught here, and will echo the message. Okay, so the message will be displayed if we enter some wrong data. And then we can do submit to database here. We'll go ahead and test this out real quick. Go OK. I'll do that just so we can see. Username, we'll use the new username tester and password. Oh, this should be a type password. Type equals password. Passwords tester, register. Okay, so it says it's okay. Now let's test to make sure the minimum length works. We'll do TRA and then password TST123. Username must be at least 5 characters. Okay, good, that works. Okay, so now let's go ahead and add the query in. To add it to the database. We're going to do, before we can run a query though, we need to make the database function to run it. So what we're going to do here is we're going to have public function query. Okay, and then we're going to do result equals MySQL query this con query. Okay, now there's a couple different types of MySQL queries that you can have. So we're just going to go ahead and return the result from this. We can make some, let's actually make a couple of variables here. Private, we'll do public. Public num rows. Public, actually we can do that as a function. Okay. rows. Result. Okay, and then we'll have public function affected rows. Okay, and then we'll just do here return MySQL num rows result, and in this one we'll return MySQL affected rows. This con. Okay, so now I have all the functions to run queries, get the number of rows, or get the affected rows. The other thing we might need is the insert ID, but I don't think we need that in this situation. So we'll go ahead and save this. Go back to here. We'll do database query. Let's add one other little thing here. Here we go, MySQL query or die this error. So the reason I don't do the die here is because you don't always want to kill your entire script. Sometimes you want to exit in a more graceful manner. So we can make a function here that controls what happens when we have an error. Now for the purposes of this, since it's a development environment, we're just going to die with the error. But for this one, let me make sure this is the right function real quick. String description list. Okay, good. That's good. Okay, that way it'll tell us. And we'll do the database query insert into users, because that's our database table, users. Okay, we're going to put the columns that we want to insert into here, and then the values that we want to insert down here. So for the columns, we want to do, we're not going to do the ID, because the ID is going to be automatically set by the server. So we're just going to do level, exp, health, max health. Oh, well, we'll need username and password as well. Username, password, level, exp health, max health, strength. You can copy this. In fact, let's go ahead and we can go ahead and do it this way. Okay, here's all of our things here, and then we're going to do the values. So what I like to do when I'm doing values here is actually I like to copy this so that I don't forget what order they're in. But then when you change this, you have to change all of the back quotes to single quotes. And then here as well. Okay, you also need to make sure before you insert the password, you want to encrypt the password. I have to mention, MD5 is not considered a good encryption. This is something very, very basic that I'm just doing because this is a development environment. If you're making a game on a production environment, like on a live server, I would not use MD5 to encrypt your password. At a minimum, you should use SHA-1, which is SHA-1. But for this, we'll just use MD5. So we'll have username, password. These we're going to set as defaults here. Level 1, no XP, 100 health, 100 max health. We'll say 1 strength, 1 intelligence, 1 endurance. Oh, I just realized we're missing something here. We're missing money. I'm going to add this here. We'll start people out with 10 money. This is going to be after max health. 10 money. Okay, so we got username, password, level XP, username, password, level XP, health, max health, money, strength, intelligence, endurance, attacks. This is just going to be an empty string. We'll explain why in a bit. Okay, let's modify the database structure to add, after max health, we'll add money. There we go. Okay, and now our registration should be good to go. Training dummy password test 123. That's odd, it didn't. Oh, we didn't provide a confirmation message. But here in the users, we have our created user as ID, username, password, level, EXP, health, max health, money, strength, endurance, intelligence, and attacks. So that all works. We're going to go ahead and add one more thing here, which is going to be if database affected rows greater than 0, count created, and then we're going to put a link back to the front page. There we go. Okay, so let's try making another account. Call this one John Smith. Password. Actually, let's be creative. We'll call him John Snow. Password nothing. Account created. Login. So we'll go here. There's no login script yet. We'll change that right now. So we'll go here. Now we have some users. I'll go ahead and set up a. This is a pretty good time to set up a layout, but I'll do the login form first real quick, and then as soon as we have users able to log in, we'll set up a layout. This is actually going to basically be exactly the same as your login form, so you can even just pretty much take the login form right from here. Except with a slight difference, this is going to be the main page, and then this is going to be login instead of register. But this is actually where things get a little bit interesting, because we don't want to show this form if the user's already logged in. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to put it in PHP. We're going to put it in an echo statement. Now, a better way to do this is templating, but I'm going to skip templating for this tutorial, and maybe I'll put it in the next one. So we've got this. We're going to do if. An important concept here is sessions, which we're about to use. If you're not familiar with sessions, sessions are the way you store data between page loads. So what that's going to do is it's going to allow you to semi-permanently store the user's ID. So when they log in, what we're going to do, they're going to enter their username and password. We're going to verify that with the database. If it's correct, we're going to set their user ID into the session. And that's going to be stored so that when they go to this main page, it's going to show them that they're logged in instead of asking them to. So we're just going to do here, if not is set, session user ID. It will ask them to log in. Okay. And then if is set, or we'll just do else. We can actually reverse this, but yeah, let's go and reverse this. Okay, we'll say if it's set, they're logged in. If it isn't, they're logged out. Okay, to save this, if we go back to this page, we should now see, here's our login form. I'll spruce this up a little bit. Go H3 style equals text. Okay, so we were training, or we were John Snow, and password is you know nothing. Okay, so that's being submitted out. Now what we need is if post login. We'll go ahead and we'll process this here. So we'll do username equals. Again, you can use the same code that you used here. Username equals, password equals. This is just to fetch it from the form and clean it for checking with the database. And then we'll do a database query that looks like this. Select from users where, change this a little bit. I'll do user ID, wait, it's ID. ID, username, password from users where username equal username. Now this is interesting. And I'll add a limit 1 onto there. So this is a database query. Now, the options here, when we make this query, it's possible that someone might enter a username that doesn't exist. So the first thing we want to add here is we want to check for if a result was returned. We can now do a try catch statement with the results of this query. Okay, so if database num rows result is equal to 0, this means the user does not exist. So we're going to throw a new exception. User does not exist. Okay, now we need to check the password. So, otherwise, if this is okay, so if this happened, the user does not exist. If it didn't catch, then the user does exist. So we're going to fetch the user data equals system. Oh, we need to add another function to our database object when we need to fetch an object. Public function fetch result. Return MySQL fetch assoc result. Okay, there we go. User data equals database. Say user. Okay, now if here's where we check the password. Password not equal to, so this is, we're going to encrypt the text that the user did again. Remember, this is the same as the way we encrypted it here. So here we made it the MD5 of itself. So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to MD5 it, and then we're going to compare it to the database. That's because if you look in the database here, this is already encrypted. So this is the encrypted version of test123. All right. So we can't compare the user's going to type in test123, but we can't compare that directly with this. Instead, what we have to do is we have to run it through the encryption and then compare both encrypted versions with each other. So this, once we MD5 this, this is going to be the same as this. The user password. So if they're not equal, that means it's an invalid password. Invalid password. Okay, and if both of these are not true, if the user does exist and their password matches, that means they're legitimate. So we're going to go ahead and set the session user ID. User ID. And now we're going to echo. Oh, we don't even need to echo anything because it's going to display here. Okay, here we go. So now our login should be all working. We'll go ahead and give it a test here. Training dummy. Test 1, 2, 3. Welcome to Warriors of Magic. There we go. Works like a charm. Okay, now that we've got this going, let's go ahead and start on the layout. Alright, I know I said I wasn't going to use templates, but I think I should actually show you guys some basics about templating. We'll just use basic PHP templates because they're pretty important. So what we're going to do here is, the idea of templating is you, instead of having manual echo statements in your code like this, you want to make the templates outside of it. So we'll go ahead and make a login template here, or we'll do an index template, but we can do the login one first. So we'll do a very standard doc type HTML, head, title, Warriors of Magic. Now here's the interesting part. You can actually break it up, because this you're going to need on every page. This code you see right here, doc type HTML, HTML head, title, head, body, you're going to need this before every page. So rather than writing this in every template, we're going to make this its own file called the header. This is going to be the footer. But for now, I'm going to test this out in a single file just to make the layout, to test the layout. We'll call this what should we call this? I'll make a directory for it. We'll call this folder templates. And then we'll call this layout.php. It doesn't have to be PHP, but we'll eventually get there, so we'll start with this. Okay, so we're going to test the layout here on layout.php. So we'll do an H3 Warriors of Magic. We'll put some styling here. When you're developing, I actually like putting CSS in a tag up here because it's easier to maintain one file than two, and the system doesn't bother caching it. Once you have things on a live server, you generally want to link this to an external style sheet so that the browser will cache it and it'll speed up the user's load time. So we're going to start here by adding some style to the H3. We're going to say text align center. Oh, it's templates. My bad. Okay, here we go. Templates layout.php. So now let's go ahead and add a content div in the center. Now, if you're new to this, what this ID does, this ID allows you to reference this div in your CSS and also if you make any JavaScript. So we'll take this and we're going to go ahead and up here we're going to say content. So what this hashtag means in CSS, this hashtag means ID. So this is a CSS selector, which means apply every style within these brackets. This styling applies to content. And then hashtag content means ID content. So whatever has the ID of content, which is this tag, everything in this tag is going to apply to it. We're going to go ahead and give this a width. We'll say 1000 px. We're going to center it. We'll give it a background color. While we're at it, let's go ahead and give the body a background color. Another good practice is to give your body a height and width of 100% and a margin and padding of 0 px. This is just to erase some browser differences. And then we'll do the background color of let's make it, what would be good? Make it maybe a red. So we'll do, I guess I'll do RGB because it's more understandable. 180, 20, 0. We'll see how this looks. If you're not familiar with RGB, this is just red, green, and blue. These values can be numbers from 0 to 255. So 255 would be 00 would be like full red. 255 here and 255 here like this. This would be red and green, so it would be like yellow. Or if you wanted to make purple, you could combine red and blue like this. Or if you wanted to make teal, you can combine green and blue. Let's actually try this and see how it looks. Okay, so that's very, very teal, but that's really hard on the eyes. So let's try maybe a bit lighter of a red mixed in with a little bit of green and no blue. Let's see how this looks. Okay, that's still pretty jarring in the eyes. We could take this down a notch. Yeah, because for color it's going to be taking up like the entire screen. We're going to make it a little bit more neutral. Okay, and then for the content here, we're going to make the background color gray. Let's do gray. We'll do 40, 40, 40. Okay, but it's not showing up. We'll go ahead and put a minimum height on this. There we go. So there's the content box here. We'll make the border just a little bit darker. We'll do 1px solid. We'll do it 34, 34, 34. Okay, we can make it a little bit darker than that. Let's say 30, 30, 30. Alright, so you can see the border now. It's very subtle. It's a subtle effect. You can make it a little bit darker if you want. I'm just going to start with this. We're going to go ahead and take this. We're going to style this a little bit. This is the H3. We're going to say font size 18 pixels. Now here's another cool trick. When you're making CSS styles, if you're in Chrome, you can inspect the element directly, and you can test out doing styles here. So you can just 22 pixels, maybe on a little bit more. Just up that, maybe there. Let's try changing the font family. If you want to check out some font families, you can go to this is Google Web Safe Fonts, and there's a W3 Schools link here. Let's try this. Copy this over to here, and we'll say font family. Alright, that looks a little bit better. We'll go ahead and copy all of this into our script then. We can make this a little bit smaller maybe. Nah, 30 pixels looks good. And we can copy all of this into our script. Okay, and then refresh, and now it's saved. Now, the margins here are a little bit bigger than we really want. We can make them a little bit smaller manually. So we'll say margin top 8 pixels, margin bottom 8 pixels. No, that actually doesn't seem much smaller. Wait, is that working? Oh, no, it's not. I put that on the content by mistake. My bad. There we go. There we go. That might be a little bit small, but I think it's fine. Alright, so we have a basic box for our website to exist in now. We have a background, we have a title, and we have a content box. This is a really, really simplistic layout. You can do much more advanced layouts, but I'm just going to stop at this for now in terms of layout because it's not really... this tutorial is mostly about getting the structure of the site working. Now, what we'll do from here is we're going to take all of this CSS, we're going to put it in an external CSS file. So just take all of this, name it as, we'll put it here, a directory called style. We'll call it layout.css. Okay, we'll save that, and then in here, instead of having that, we're going to do link rel equals style sheet href equals style.layout.css. Now let's check and make sure it still works. In fact, does not. Template style layout.css. Oh, it's because we're in the templates directory. So instead of going in the templates directory here, so what happens that you may not realize is when you put a link in here, we're generally not going to be accessing these templates directly from their directory. Usually we're going to be accessing them from this directory. So if we require this template into here, it will work pretty well. I'll go ahead and say require templates layout.php. Okay, here we go. There we go. We don't need this anymore. Okay, now what we can do with this is we can chop this up into sections, and we'll make all of this the header, as header.php, and then we'll make all of this the footer, because all of this is going to come before and after the actual content. The way you can use this, one way to use this would just be to do this. You can do require templates header.php. Okay, so we have our header, we have our footer, and then we have something in between. If we see how this looks in practice, guess what? It looks like this. Now we can add this magic into the register page, because we sort of have a pseudo template down here. So we can just do is require templates header. Let's do this a little bit differently now. We'll get into this in a second. And then down here we just require templates footer.php. So you should have picked up on what the require function does. The require function essentially loads an entire PHP file and inserts it here. It's almost like copy pasting. Literally, it's like it takes all of the code in this file and copies it. It's like this is physically what it does. You see where this says footer? See this code in footer? It takes this and it goes here. It does that. And then here, where you see this, I'll undo that real quick. This is the header. It goes here and it does this. Well, it just inserts it in. So that's what the require statement does, in case you hadn't picked up on that one. And that makes it very easy to reuse your sections of code. And if you ever need to make a change to your header, you can do it in one place, right in this file, and then it'll take effect everywhere on the site. I'll show you that in 1 second. Okay, now you notice here this text is now pretty hard to read, so we're going to need to go into our CSS here. We're going to need to change the text style. So we'll do color, we'll do RGB, we'll say 220, 220, 220. This should put it pretty close to white. the lower the number, the darker it is. So 000 is black, 255, 255, 255 is white. Okay, now that's readable. I'm going to go ahead and take this form. We're going to put a little bit of a styling on this to center it more. Can actually, let's see here. Where are we on the register page? Alright, so here's the form on the register page. There's only one thing wrong with this, but it's okay. Div class equals, set that class in a second. So we're going to make this div a form container. We're going to make that a thing, just for general forms. Close these. We'll make a form container class here. We're going to say margin. Okay, we don't actually have to put the margins on there. We'll put them in the thing directly here. We will say style width 400px div center. That might be a little too complicated. We'll do margins here. But then what we can do here, actually, is we want to center it, which it's now centered, so that's very nice. Alright, well, we can make the forms align to the center. Okay, so we'll center everything inside the form container, and then that all centers there. We could put some margins on there too to make it a little bit nicer. I'll go ahead and say form container input margin bottom 2px. Okay, so now I got a little bit of margin on there. So that's just a little bit nicer, and we'll go ahead and add some top margin to the form container itself. And I get some bottom margin too. Okay, this still isn't very pretty yet, but we'll add a little bit of color to it now. We'll say background color. We'll make it a little bit lighter than the rest of the background. So the normal background is this. So we'll make it a little bit lighter. We'll say 50. We'll add a border radius to make the border curved. We'll say 5px is good. And then add some padding. Okay, so now I have this box here. We can trim the style inside register itself to say 320. There we go. We'll up the padding a little bit more. Okay, and that's the little box. This still isn't very pretty, but it works. You can make this style a lot more fancy using whatever HTML CSS design you want. But that works now. There's only one little problem. Let's try making another account, and I'll show you a problem real quick. Let's do a Rob Stark password red wedding. Here's the problem. See up here? Account created, login. So we want that to display here. We don't want that to display up here. But if we look in the script, here's the register page. Here's where it's echoing. It's echoing right here. There's also error messages that can happen. But we don't really want to start our display all the way up here for various reasons. It's better to have all of your display at the bottom of the script. So what we can do is do something called output buffering. So what we're going to do is right up here. We'll start it here actually. Ob start. What ob start does, this is output buffering start. Every time you have an echo, instead of actually displaying it, it's going to capture it, and it's going to put it in. It's going to put it aside in the output buffer. It's not going to display it yet. Then you can access it yourself, which is what we're going to do right here. We're going to do echo ob get clean. What this means is output buffering. It will get the results of the buffer. It'll return it, and then it will clean the buffer. It returns it to the echo statement, which means we're going to display it. Oh, got it. Let's actually assign this to a variable here. There we go. Okay. Alright, so now it displays it there. It's not centered, it's not pretty. We can put this inside a div here, or inside a paragraph. Equals text align center. What this is just going to do is this is going to display the output from our form. So if the account was created, if there's an error message, it's all going to go right here, and it's all going to get centered. Okay, now it gets centered. That's very nice. It looks better than when we started. Now we have a bunch of accounts in the database. I'll show you guys real quick. We got a bunch of Sansa Starks and Rob Starks. We're going to go ahead and just delete because we don't need them. Okay, so people are also able to log in now. We'll close out the register page now that we've got that set up. Close out the database object. With the index, we've got welcome to Warriors of Magic. I'm also going to add the output buffering that we did on the register page to this page. So we're going to go ob start. Welcome to Warriors of Magic. Okay. We're gonna go ahead and center everything that's within the content. Here, text, line, center. So that's centered now.